Rosalba Fen was unthreading a dead soldier's bandage when the Wolf King called her needlework useless in front of the Bloodsnow Field Tent. The soldier on the table was not dead because of her. That was the cruelty of it. He had lived 3 nights under her stitches after a spear tore below his ribs, breathing through wolf winter fever while red snow froze beneath the cot legs. Rosalba had kept him warm, kept him closed, kept the old field thread tight enough for his body to remember how to hold itself together. Then the Royal Medical Office arrived with polished steel, white gloves, and war surgeon Malvern Orr, and by morning, the soldier was gone. Malvern stood beside the table in a clean dark coat, his silver surgical clasps untouched by blood. Your Majesty, the issue is not her effort, it is method. Field women did what they could before formal medicine reached the war camps. But old stitches are not treatment. Cedran looked at Rosalba's blood-stiff bandage. Then her needlework will no longer decide who closes my soldiers. The words struck the tent harder than winter. Rosalba held the cut bandage in both hands. It was stiff with dried blood, hers and the soldiers'. Around her, the Bloodsnow Field Tent shuddered under wind. Rows of wounded men lay beneath wolf-hide blankets. Some were sleeping. Some were pretending. Beyond the tent walls, royal wolf banners snapped in the storm, black against the pale red snow where battle had melted into the ground. Wolf King Cedran Vale stood in the center aisle in iron-gray armor, his white wolf mantle darkened by sleet. His crown was old bone and black silver, shaped like a ring of fangs above his dark hair. Men obeyed him because fear and loyalty walked together in his shadow. He looked at Rosalba's hands. He had looked at them before, after the Frostridge battle, when 27 soldiers came in half-frozen and torn open, and she had stitched until dawn, while Cedran stood silent in the tent door, watching men live who should not have. Back then, he had said, "Your hands know where death loosens first." Now he said, "Rosalba, the royal surgeons will take charge of wound closure from this hour, not Fen, not field matron, Rosalba." He used her given name, like a private softness laid over a public dismissal. She lifted her eyes. "Do not make my name gentle while taking the work from my hands." A few soldiers opened their eyes. Cedran's jaw tightened. Malvern's expression remained sympathetic. That was the most dangerous thing about him. He made insult sound like necessary care. "Field attachment is understandable," Malvern said. "Women who work too long among the dying often believe survival depends on their habits. But war medicine must advance beyond thread charms and kitchen cautions." Rosalba looked at him. "A man who calls stopping blood a charm has not watched enough men bleed." A murmur passed through the tent. Malvern let it come, then turned it neatly. "Exactly, Majesty. She takes disagreement as insult. That pride endangers discipline." Cedran's gaze moved across the cots. The men watched him with fever-bright eyes. They would obey his verdict even if their bodies knew better. He said, "You will assist where asked. You will not perform primary closure." Assist. After 20 years of holding men together, through mud, frost, fang wounds, arrow tears, and blade fever, Rosalba folded the dead soldier's bandage once. Then again, her fingers did not tremble. "You replaced me during bleeding season," she said. "Do not later call the blood a surprise." Cedran's eyes darkened. For one breath, something passed between them that had no place in a public tent. The memory of him standing over her work table after Frost Ridge, his voice rough when he asked how many men she had saved, the way he had touched the edge of a stitched bandage as if it was sacred, the way he had almost thanked her, and then remembered kings did not owe field women tenderness. Malvern stepped between that memory and the room. "The new instruments are prepared," he said. "We will begin with the eastern wounded." Rosalba looked toward her old kit at the side table. Inside it sat the Wound-Thread Spool. It was plain bone-white, no larger than her palm, wound with grey thread that had once belonged to field women older than her grandmother. No royal surgeon had ever asked where it came from. They saw thread and thought sewing. They saw women's hands and thought service. But the spool had never behaved like ordinary thread. Field thread did not heal flesh. It remembered closure. The old spool tightened only where a body had accepted binding, warmed when fever hid beneath clean skin, and refused any cut made before the wound was ready to let go. Now, as Malvern lifted his silver tools, the spool clicked once inside the kit. Rosalba heard it. So did no one else. A horn sounded outside. Then shouting, the tent flap burst open, and 3 wolf soldiers staggered in, carrying a 4th between them. Blood steamed from all of them, bright against snow and dark fur cloaks. One had a shoulder wound already stitched by royal method, neat and shining under Malvern's seal. The stitches split open as he crossed the threshold. He screamed. Malvern moved fast. "Table him!" Rosalba stepped forward by instinct. A royal assistant blocked her. "You heard the king." The wounded soldier grabbed Rosalba's skirt with bloody fingers. "Matron Fen," he gasped. It opened when they cut the old thread out. Silence struck the tent. Malvern's voice sharpened. Battle movement reopened an unstable closure. Nothing more. The soldier's eyes rolled white. No, it was holding until the silver tool touched it. Cedran looked at Malvern, then at Rosalba. Not belief. Not yet. Only the first crack in certainty. "Can you close it?" he asked Malvern. "Of course," Malvern said. His silver needle entered the wound. The blood surged harder. The soldier arched off the table, and every wounded man nearby flinched as if the pain had passed through them all. Rosalba's kit snapped open by itself. The Wound-Thread Spool rolled across the table, glowing pale blue beneath streaks of blood. Cedran and still. Malvern stepped back. The thread unwound without Rosalba touching it, slid over the table edge, and knotted itself around the soldier's torn flesh like a living pulse, searching for a way home. Rosalba whispered, "Do not pull it." Cedran's voice came low. "What is that?" She looked at the glowing thread, then at the king who had trusted polished tools over hands that had kept his army alive. "Something older than your office," she said, and apparently more willing to listen. Wound-thread memory. Old closure severed before the wound released. Malvern did not deny the wound thread had closed around the soldier. He denied that old thread could judge royal medicine. Field thread. Traps. Fever. Majesty, he said, voice steady while pale blue light pulsed around the open wound. Silver only exposes what old stitches hide. Rosalba Fen stood beside the table with blood drying beneath her nails and her hands held carefully away from the glowing thread. She knew better than to snatch at a wound that was still deciding whether to live. The old spool had knotted itself where the torn flesh remembered holding. It had not healed the soldier. Not yet. It had refused to let him come apart. The wounded man shook beneath the wolf-hide blanket. His face was grey, his teeth clenched against a sound too tired to become a scream. Cedran Vale looked at the thread, then at the silver needle still in Malvern's hand. Why did the wound open when old thread was cut? Malvern's expression softened into clinical patience. Because the wound was unstable beneath her closure. Old stitches create false confidence. My tool revealed what her method concealed. Rosalba looked at the soldier. Ask whether he bled before they cut my thread. Cedran turned to the nearest assistant. Did he? The young assistant swallowed. No, Majesty. His fever was low when brought to the eastern table. Malvern said, temporarily low. Wolf, winter fever can hide beneath clean skin. Yes, Rosalba said. And field thread warms when fever hides. Yours cut before it asked. A few soldiers shifted on their cots. The thread tightened once. The bleeding slowed. Cedran saw it. Not belief. A king did not become wise because blood made him uncomfortable, but his certainty had begun to lose its shape. Malvern stepped nearer. Majesty, this is precisely why field superstition is dangerous. The thread reacts to blood memory. Blood remembers pain, pressure, Fear. It does not remember medical truth. Rosalba's laugh was quiet and without warmth. A man who has never trusted a wound to speak should not decide what it remembers. Cedran's eyes moved to her. There it was again, that old dangerous attention. Not tenderness, not apology. The look of a man remembering her bent over battle tables while men lived because she knew when flesh was still holding. She looked away first. Admiration was cheaper than trust. The wounded soldier gripped her wrist. Matron Fen. A royal assistant reached to remove his hand. Rosalba's voice cut low. Touch him, and I will stitch your glove to the table. The assistant froze. Cedran said nothing for one breath too long. Then, let him hold what steadies him. Only after Cedran spoke did the assistant step back. Rosalba felt the old wound of that. Her truth still needed a king's echo before men obeyed it. She bent close to the soldier. Do not fight the thread. Breathe small. Let the old closure remember the way back. Malvin's mouth tightened. You are interfering with royal procedure. No, she said. I am preventing your procedure from finishing what it started. The Wound-Thread Spool clicked again. A second strand unwound, slid across the soldier's shoulder, and stopped at the exact place where Malvin's silver tool had cut through the old knot. The blue light darkened there, not red, not black, but bruised purple, like memory under skin. Cedran's voice lowered. What does the spool remember? Rosalba did not soften the answer, whether a wound accepted closure, whether fever broke, whether flesh released the thread willingly or had it torn away because a polished office wanted a cleaner-looking seam. Malvin said, She makes poetry from battlefield habit. Then ask the wound. Rosalba replied. Cedran looked at the soldier. When did it open? The man's breath stuttered. When they cut her stitch, Majesty. It felt wrong, like the wound pulled after the thread. Battle shock, Malvin said. The soldier shook his head weakly. No. It was holding until Silver touched it. The tent went still. Outside, wind dragged red snow against the canvas. Inside, every wounded man watched the table as if watching his own bandages decide whether to betray him. Cedran turned to Malvin, who ordered field stitches removed. Malvin answered too smoothly. The royal office standard requires old closure. Be cleared before formal treatment. Every old stitch? Cedran asked. For wounds assigned to primary surgical review, yes. Rosalba's fingers curled. Cedran noticed. What? She looked at him then, and the years between them felt colder than the snow outside. You replaced me during bleeding season. Then let them cut every door I had left closed. His jaw tightened. No apology came. Good. An apology would have been a bandage over a wound still full of steel. Cedran turned to the assistants. How many closures failed after silver tools touched them? Malvin stepped in. Majesty, this is not the moment to let panic audit medicine. Rosalba looked at him. No, this is exactly when medicine should survive being watched. The eldest assistant lowered his eyes. 4 reopened today. 2 in the eastern row. 1 shoulder. 1 belly wound. And before Silver? Cedran asked. Stable under field closure. Malvin's voice sharpened. Temporarily. The Wound-Thread Spool rolled once across the table and stopped against the dead soldier's stiff bandage in Rosalba's hand. The bandage she had been unthreading when Cedran called her needlework useless. Blue light crawled along its old knots. Rosalba went very still. Cedran saw her face. What is it? She lifted the bandage. The thread had formed a line across the dried blood. Not a sentence, not speech, but old field notation every matron learned before she was trusted near a knife. Her voice came rough. Royal silver report. Field stitches removed before fever broke. Malvin did not deny the royal silver report. He denied that early removal meant error. Fever must be exposed before it can be treated, Majesty, he said, calm while the dead soldier's bandage glowed in Rosalba Fen's hand. Field closure lowers visible fever by trapping rot beneath thread. Royal medicine requires old closure to be cleared before formal treatment. Rosalba looked down at the blue light, crawling through the old knots. The Wound-Thread Spool had not written words like a clerk. It had remembered timing. It had remembered that the soldier's body had still been holding when royal silver cut the field thread away. That was not enough to name murder. It was enough to name a mistake too clean to be accidental. Cedran Vale stood beside the blood-dark table, his wolf mantle damp with melted snow. "Who signed the removal order?" Malvin's expression did not change. "Standard protocol is not signed for every wound, Majesty. It is issued through the Royal Medical Office." "Then bring the protocol." A royal assistant hesitated. Rosalba watched him wait for Malvin. Cedran saw it too. "Now," the Wolf King said. Only then did the assistant move. Rosalba felt the familiar bruise of it. Her warning needed Cedran's command before it became sound men obeyed. The wounded soldier on the table shuddered. The wound thread tightened once more, holding him together without closing what fever had not released. Malvin stepped closer. "You see how dangerous this is. Her thread arrests the wound in an unfinished state. Temporary holding is not healing." Rosalba looked at him. "Neither is opening a door before the house is ready to breathe." "Poetry again. Field language," she said. "You would know the difference if you had ever waited beside a man whose fever broke one breath at a time." Cedran's eyes moved to her hands. She did not let the attention become softness. "Ask whether wound release assessments were performed," she said. Cedran turned to the returning assistant, who carried a sealed silver folder. "Were they?" The assistant's throat worked. "Not before initial silver clearance, Majesty," Malvin said smoothly. "Wound release assessment is an outdated field custom. It delays proper cleaning." Rosalba's voice stayed level. "It asks whether the flesh has accepted closure, whether fever has broken, whether the blood pulls toward life or away from it." "Unmeasured language. Then why does your measured steel leave dirtier blood?" A low murmur moved through the tent. Several soldiers looked at their own bandages. Malvin caught the fear and used it. "Majesty, if men begin refusing royal treatment because a field matron frightens them with thread stories, we lose discipline before the next assault." Rosalba turned sharply. "I did not frighten them. Their wounds did." Cedran lifted the silver folder. "Read the first page." The assistant looked to Malvin again. Cedran's voice dropped. "Do not look at him when I ask for my soldier's blood record." The assistant opened the folder. "Royal closure protocol. All field knots, old stitches, thread bindings, and non-office closures to be removed prior to surgical assessment." Rosalba went still. "All. Not unstable wounds. Not infected wounds. All." Cedran's jaw tightened. "Before assessment?" The assistant lowered his eyes. "Yes, Majesty." Malvin folded his hands. "Because old knots contaminate the surgical field. Standardization is necessary in war medicine." Rosalba held up the dead soldier's bandage. "This old knot kept him alive 3 nights. And he still died," Malvin said gently. The tent fell silent. Rosalba absorbed the blow without showing where it landed. Cedran's face darkened. "Careful." "No," Rosalba said before the king could make her pain into his authority. "Let him say it. Let every man hear how easily a surgeon uses the dead to defend the knife that followed." Malvin's mouth tightened for the first time. "Only slightly." "Enough." Cedran looked back to the assistant. "Were stable men included in the removal order?" "Yes, Majesty." "How many?" Malvin stepped in. "A partial count will inflame the tent. Casualty review belongs after battle." Rosalba's laugh had no warmth. "Men bled in public. Your numbers can stand in the same room." Cedran looked at her. She held his gaze. "Do not admire that sentence. Use it." The word struck him harder than anger. He turned back to the assistant. "Answer only what I asked. Were stable men included?" "Yes." "Did fever rise before or after silver exposure?" The assistant looked down at the wounded man still held by the glowing thread. After. In several cases, Malven said, exposure reveals fever. It does not create it. Rosalba stepped to the table. Then ask whether my warning was entered before or after his protocol. Cedran faced the assistant. The young man's hands shook against the folder. Matron Fen's warning was attached as field objection. And classified? Cedran asked. The assistant whispered, non-office superstition. Delay risk. Rosalba closed her eyes for one breath. Not to weep. To keep from wasting strength on a room that had finally begun to notice what it had taken. The Wound-Thread Spool rolled from the table to the silver folder and stopped against its seal. A pale blue strand unwound, slid under the first page, and pulled up a hidden duplicate order beneath it. Malvin's face became very still. Cedran saw. So did Rosalba. Read it, Cedran said. The assistant's voice broke around the words. Royal removal order. All field stitches cut before wound release assessment. Malvin did not deny the removal order required every field stitch cut before assessment. He denied that standardization could be blamed for battlefield deaths. Closure failure reflects battlefield severity, Majesty, he said, standing beside the blood. Dark table as if calm could clean the air. These men were wounded before royal silver ever touched them. Field closure delayed collapse. It did not prevent it. Rosalba Fen held the dead soldier's bandage in one hand and the edge of the glowing wound-thread spool in the other. The thread had not healed anyone by miracle. It had remembered. Old closure severed before fever broke. All field stitches cut before wound release assessment. Proof. Yes, but not enough yet to make the royal office bleed truth in public. Cedran Vale looked at the open removal order. How many wounds reopened after protocol began? Malvin's mouth tightened. A count taken during active battle will be misleading. Rosalba looked at Cedran. Ask whether they were bleeding before your office touched them. Cedran's eyes cut to the eldest assistant. Were they? The assistant swallowed. Several were stable under field closure. Several? Cedran asked. Malvin stepped in. Stable is a field word. It can mean merely that bleeding had paused. Rosalba's voice stayed even. Paused bleeding is the difference between a man writing to his wife and a man being folded into canvas. Bring the closure failure sheets, Cedran ordered. Malvin's tone sharpened by a thread. Majesty, casualty review belongs after battle. Panic kills discipline. No, Rosalba said. Hidden panic kills men. Watched medicine should survive being watched. Cedran did not look at her with admiration this time. He looked at the clerk. Bring them. That mattered. Not enough, but it mattered. The clerk returned with a narrow stack of blood-spotted pages. He hesitated at Malvin's side until Cedran's gaze hardened. Here, Cedran said. Not behind him. The clerk stepped to the king. Rosalba felt the old wound of that too. Even now, records moved only when Cedran made space for them. Her knowledge still waited outside until a crown opened the tent flap. Cedran read the first sheet. Eastern row, shoulder wound, reopened after silver removal. The wounded soldier on Rosalba's table whimpered. The wound thread tightened by one small knot, holding him from collapse. Cedran read again. Belly wound, reopened after silver probe. Thigh wound, reopened after field binding cut. Collar wound, reopened after office closure attempt. Malvin lifted one hand. Every one of those wounds was severe. Rosalba turned to him. Then why were they quiet before your tools made them speak? The blue thread pulsed once. Not dramatic, precise. It slid from the spool to the first failure sheet and stopped at one phrase. Field. Stable. On arrival. Cedran's voice lowered. This one was marked stable. Temporarily, Malvin said. Rosalba stepped closer to the record. Ask when my warning was filed. Cedran did. The clerk looked down. Before the eastern row was opened. And was it read? Cedran asked. The clerk's silence answered before his mouth did. Malvin said, "Her warning was reviewed under delay risk." Rosalba's laugh was soft and terrible. "Delay risk. A field woman says wait until fever breaks, and the office writes danger beside her patients." Cedran looked at the clerk. "Who classified it?" The clerk's eyes flicked toward Malvin. "Office review seal." The clerk whispered. "Whose office?" Cedran asked. "War Surgeon Malvin Oars." Malvin folded his hands. "Of course. All treatment objections pass through my office. Custody is not guilt, Majesty." "No," Rosalba said. "But custody is where a warning goes to be renamed." Malvin's gaze cooled. "You are using one dead soldier to indict royal medicine." Rosalba lifted the blood-stiff bandage. "He lived 3 nights under my thread and died one morning under your office. If that is one man to you, it is already too many." Cedran flinched. Only a little. Enough for her to see. She did not soften. A shout came from the western row. "Matron Fen!" Another soldier's bandage had begun to leak beneath a silver seam. The young man tried to sit up, eyes wide with animal fear. Malvin turned sharply. "Do not move him." Rosalba was already crossing the tent. "Then do not cut anything else." Cedran followed 1 step behind, then stopped when she looked back. "Do not stand over my hands now as if warriors repair." He stopped. She knelt by the soldier. "Who cut the field knot?" The soldier's lips trembled. "Assistant said it had to be clean." The Wound-Thread Spool rolled across the floor to her knee, trailing blue light through red snow tracked inside the tent. Its strand touched the silver seam and recoiled. Rosalba's voice went quiet. "The wound rejected the silver," Malvin said. "No, the wound was unstable." Cedran looked at the clerk. "Before or after silver touched the old knot." The clerk turned the failure sheets with shaking hands. 1 page loosened from the stack, then another, then 6. The wound thread dragged them into a line across the floor, not writing accusation, only matching timing. Every reopened wound began where field thread had been cut. Rosalba looked at Cedran. "Ask why the dead man's bandage remembers what his chart forgot. Read the list. Closure failure list. Reopened wounds began after Royal Silver Protocol." Malvin did not deny the closure failure list. He denied that reopened wounds meant Royal Protocol had killed them. "Timing is not cause, Majesty," he said, standing where the blood-spotted pages lay in a line across the tent floor. Battlefield severity increased after the Eastern Assault. Royal Protocol recorded what field closure hid. Rosalba Fen knelt beside the western row soldier, 1 hand near his leaking silver seam, the other held open so the wound thread could move without being forced. The thread had recoiled from the royal stitch. It had not closed him. Not yet. It was waiting for the wound to stop fighting the wrong metal. Cedran Vale stood a pace behind her because she had told him not to stand over her hands. That mattered. It did not forgive him. His voice cut through the tent. "Were these men marked stable before silver touched them?" The clerk bent over the failure sheets. "Yes, Majesty. Field. Stable on arrival appears on 6 sheets. Malvin folded his hands. "Field. Stable is an imprecise classification. Chart revisions corrected poor field language after proper exposure." Rosalba looked up. "Ask who changed stable into unstable." Cedran turned to the clerk. "Who revised the charts?" The clerk hesitated. Malvin answered smoothly. "Royal Medical Review revises all incoming field classifications. That is standard office practice." "Who signed the revisions?" Cedran asked. The clerk swallowed. "War Surgeon Malvin Orr's office seal." Malvin's face did not change. "Office seal, Majesty. Not personal authorship." "No," Rosalba said. "But it is where my men became worse on paper after they could no longer answer." The western row soldier whimpered. Rosalba bent back to him. "Small breath. Do not chase the pain. Let the thread find where you were still holding." The wound thread slid over her knuckles and touched the torn seam. Blue light trembled once, then paused where silver had cut through an old field knot. Cedran watched her hands. She felt it. "Do not admire them," she said without looking back. "Use the records." His jaw tightened. Were revisions made before or after the wounds reopened? The clerk turned the stack. "After, Majesty. And before or after deaths?" Malvern stepped in. "Majesty, death timing in battle tents is not clean. Men fail by minutes, not categories." Rosalba's voice stayed low. "The dead became unstable after silver. Then their charts learned to say they had always been that way." A hush moved through the cots. Several wounded soldiers turned their faces toward the record sheets, as if their own bandages might be rewritten while they slept. Cedran looked at the clerk. Was Rosalba Fen's warning filed before deaths rose? The clerk searched the folder. "Yes, Majesty. Field objection filed before the eastern row was opened, before the first revision, before the second death after protocol." Malvern's tone sharpened. "Objection is not diagnosis. Grief can make habit look like knowledge." Rosalba looked at him. "And prestige can make an experiment look like treatment." The words landed too hard. Malvern went still, only for a breath. Cedran noticed. But Rosalba had not meant to prove experiment yet. She had meant to make him bleed caution into the room. Why were Field stable wounds later marked unstable? Cedran asked. Malvern recovered. "Because silver exposure revealed deeper rot." Rosalba touched the soldier's old field knot scar. "Then ask whether fever rose before or after the silver opened them." The clerk read. "After silver removal in 5, after silver probe in 2, fever unreadable in 1. Unreliable records," Malvern said. "Field women underreport fever to keep authority." Rosalba's eyes lifted. "My authority was taken before the charts changed. Who benefited from blaming field closure after my hands were removed?" The tent went colder than the storm outside. Cedran looked at Malvern. Malvern held his gaze. "The army benefited from standardization." "No," Rosalba said. "A man benefits. An office benefits. A dead soldier does not benefit from a cleaner excuse." The Wound-Thread Spool rolled from beside her knee to the chart stack. A single strand hooked under the top sheet and tugged. A revised chart slid free. Then, the original beneath it. Same soldier. 2 versions. Cedran stepped forward, then stopped before crossing into Rosalba's working space. "Read both." The clerk's voice shook. "Original. Field. Stable on arrival. Fever low. Closure holding. Matron Fen advises no release until second fever break." He swallowed. "Revision. Unstable field closure. Fever concealed by old thread. Royal silver exposure revealed fatal condition." Rosalba's face did not move. Inside, something old and tired broke quietly. The soldier beside her breathed harder. She laid 2 fingers near his wound. "Not now," she whispered. "You are not a chart." Cedran heard that. His face changed. No apology. "Good." She had no space for one. The wound thread tightened gently beneath her fingers. The bleeding slowed. Not sealed, only held. Cedran turned to the clerk. "How many charts have original and revised versions?" Malvern said. "Majesty, duplicate drafts are ordinary in medical review." Cedran did not look at him. "How many?" The clerk's eyes filled with fear. "All reopened cases in this stack." Rosalba looked at Cedran. "Ask whether the wound failed, or whether the record was taught to." Cedran's voice dropped. "Read the revision heading." The clerk lifted the hidden page. "Royal Chart Revision. Field stable wounds relabeled unstable after silver removal. The rewritten charts did not make the soldiers safer. They only made the dead easier to blame." Rosalba Fen stayed beside the western row soldier, while the wound thread held his opened seam in a trembling blue line. Not healed. Not sealed. Held long enough for breath to choose staying. Across the tent, Cedran Vale stood over the original and revised charts with the look of a king discovering that ink could wound after steel. Malvanor adjusted one silver clasp at his wrist. Chart revision is not deception, Majesty. It is correction. Field, stable language, lacks surgical precision. Rosalba did not turn from the soldier. Then why does every corrected chart protect your silver and accuse my thread? A few wounded men opened their eyes. Malvan answered them, not her. Because fear spreads faster than fever in a war tent. We must keep language clean. Cedran's voice came cold. Open the death review classifications. Malvan's head lifted. Majesty, death review belongs to the Royal Medical Office after battle. This battle is happening on my tables. The clerk moved toward the sealed case at Malvan's station, then stopped. Again. Waiting. Cedran saw it. So did Rosalba. Do not wait for the man under review to permit review, Cedran said. Only then did the clerk open the case. Rosalba pressed 2 fingers beside the soldier's wound. Small breath. Do not chase the sting. The man whispered. Am I dying? Not while your body is still arguing. His mouth trembled. That means no. It means breathe like you are worth the time. Cedran heard the line. Rosalba felt his gaze catch on her. She looked back once. Do not look wounded, because I said to him what you should have said to every soldier before letting them become protocol. His face tightened. He took the blow without answer. Good. Words were not repair. Records were beginning. The clerk read from the death review sheet. First, Eastern casualty. Cause revised from closure shock to concealed field fever. Second casualty. Cause revised from blood loss after reopening to failed old closure. Third, Rosalba Fen stille. Malvan stepped in. Every revision reflects better understanding after formal examination. Cedran's voice lowered. Were these men enrolled in a treatment trial? The tent went silent. Malvan's calm did not vanish. It sharpened. Majesty, all wartime medicine advances through observed cases. That was not my question. Rosalba finally turned. Malvan's eyes flicked to her, then back to Cedran. Prestige medicine requires battlefield proof. Soldiers understand duty. Rosalba's voice went quiet. Did they understand they were being used to prove your office? Malvan spread his hands. That is an ugly framing for necessary advancement. No, she said. It is ugly because it finally fits. The Wound-Thread Spool clicked. Not once. 3 times. A thin strand slipped from the soldier's wound to the death review folder, touched the edge, then recoiled from a hidden page sealed in silver wax. Cedran saw. Open it. Malvan moved half a step. Majesty, sealed trial language is restricted. Cedran looked at him. You had wounded men cut open under my wolf banners. Nothing about this remains private. The clerk broke the wax. His hands shook so hard the page rattled. Royal Silver Closure Trial, he read. Objective. Demonstrate superiority of sterile silver closure over field. Thread dependency in active war wounds. Rosalba felt every word enter the tent like cold water. Dependency. Again. They did not call her method experience. They called it dependency, so cutting it away sounded like freedom. The clerk continued. Trial population. Bloodsnow wounded assigned to Eastern and Western rows. Existing field closures to be removed before assessment to eliminate thread influence. A soldier cursed under his breath. Another began to sob quietly into his blanket. Malvan lifted his voice before grief became anger. The language is clinical. It does not mean harm was intended. It means variables must be controlled. Rosalba stared at him. Variables? Her voice did not rise. That made it worse. She touched the hand of the soldier beside her. This is Bren. He has 2 daughters and a wife who sends him dried apples because he hates army oats. That man near the eastern pole is Harrow, who sings badly when fever climbs. The dead soldier whose bandage you revised had a brother in the next cot, who watched me stitch him 3 nights. She looked at Malvin. Which part of them was your variable? The tent held its breath. Cedran's expression broke, not into softness, but into something harder to watch. Responsibility. Late. Raw. And still not enough. Stop all silver closure trials, he ordered. Malvin's face tightened. Stopping now risks every patient under transition. Rosalba turned sharply. Do not make them dependent on the harm, and then call stopping it dangerous. Cedran looked to her. What do they need? The question cut too close to mercy. She answered like a field matron. Not a woman with an old ache in her chest. No more silver cuts. Thread release assessment on every reopened wound. Fever red before closure is changed. Field women returned to the tables they were removed from. Malvin said, You are giving command now? Rosalba looked at Cedran. No. I am saying what would have saved them before command arrived late. Cedran faced the tent. Her instructions stand for emergency stabilization. Emergency, Rosalba repeated. He looked back at her. She did not let him hide from the word. Temporary respect is how powerful men borrow women until the crisis ends. Cedran lowered his eyes for 1 beat. Then he raised them to the clerk. Read the trial authorization. Malvin said, Majesty, read. The clerk turned the page. His voice went thin. Authorization. War Surgeon Malvin Orr. Field objection to be classified as dependency resistance. The wound thread tightened around Bren's wound, and the bleeding slowed. Then the spool rolled to the dead soldier's bandage and pulled loose one final hidden strip of notation. The clerk whispered the words it exposed. Bloodsnow casualty record. Deaths rose after royal closure protocol began. The Bloodsnow Field Tent did not erupt. That would have been easier. Men did not shout first when they realized their pain had been measured for prestige. They went quiet. Wounded soldiers looked at their bandages, then at the silver instruments, then at Rosalba Fen, as if the woman they had trusted all along had become the only solid thing in the storm. Malvin Orr used the silence before grief could. Casualty increase after protocol began does not prove protocol caused it, he said. The Eastern assault worsened every wound in this tent. The trial only recorded what battle had already done. Rosalba kept her hand on Bren's reopened seam. The wound thread trembled beneath her fingers. It held him, but barely. He was alive because the thread remembered what the charts had tried to rename. Battle did not revise the charts, she said. Your office did. Malvin turned toward Cedran. Majesty, if we allow field panic to interrupt royal treatment, we will lose more men tonight. Rosalba looked up. Field panic? You mean the men asking whether they were told what was being done to them? A wounded soldier whispered. I was never told. Another said. They said the silver was safer. A third tried to pull at his bandage. Rosalba's voice cut through the tent. No one pulls anything. Not thread, not silver, not cloth. If your wound is holding, you let it hold until someone who knows release looks at it. They obeyed, not because Cedran repeated her, because pain knew her voice. Cedran saw that. The sight did something to him. His mouth tightened, and for one moment his hand moved as if he wanted to reach for her shoulder. Rosalba did not look away from the soldier. Do not comfort me while I am working. His hand stopped. Good. She had no room for kingly remorse beside an open wound. Cedran turned to the field women waiting near the supply wall. Return to the tables. They did not move. Rosalba felt the moment sharpen. Cedran's gaze narrowed. Why are they waiting? Malvin answered. Because only royal assistants may perform closure in a trial zone. Rosalba laughed once, low and bitter. Trial zone. You mean the part of the tent where men stopped being patients? Cedran looked at Malvin. Who removed the field women? Royal closure protocol requires controlled hands. Whose hands were removed? Cedran asked. The clerk searched the side ledger. Matron Fen, Elsbeth Marr, Lowen Greer, Sada Holt, Mireia Voss. All field women reassigned to washing, carrying, and corpse preparation during royal closure review. A sound moved through the cots. Not rage, recognition. The men who had survived winter raids under those women's hands finally understood why the tent had felt colder. Rosalba's face went still. "Corpse preparation," she said. Malvin's expression remained polished. "Every camp needs order. No. Every office needs the women who know the wound moved far enough away that failure can look official." Cedran's voice turned hard. Field women returned to wound tables under emergency authority. Rosalba stood. Bren's thread held. "For emergency authority?" Cedran looked at her. For now is how men borrow women before writing them out again." The words struck him in front of the tent. He accepted them. No apology. Only a silence that knew it deserved worse. A runner burst in through the flap, snow in his hair. "Majesty, Western Row refusing silver treatment." Malvin seized it. "You see? Disorder already spreads." Rosalba turned toward the Western Row. "They are refusing to be cut before they are assessed. That is not disorder. That is memory arriving late." Cedran looked at her. "What do you require to stabilize the tent?" The question was careful. Too careful. She heard the difference between need and trust. "I will stabilize the men," she said. "I will not stabilize your office." His face tightened. "Rosalba." "No. Matron Fen. If you need my work in public, Rosalba is what you used when you wanted dismissal to sound kind." The tent held its breath. Cedran lowered his head once. Matron Fen. Her heart hurt. She hated that it did. She faced the field women. "Elsbeth, Western Row. Lowen, fever checks before any closure change. Sada, remove silver clamps only where thread has rejected them. Mireia, record. Before and after. Names, times, fever, wound behavior." The women moved instantly. The tent changed. Not healed, not safe, but alive with hands that knew how to wait. Malvin's voice went cold. "You are assuming command of royal medicine." Rosalba looked at Cedran. "No. I am refusing royal service under conditions that erase field women and call our knowledge contamination. I will treat soldiers as men. I will not serve a protocol that uses them." Cedran heard the separation in it. Not leaving the tent. Leaving him. Leaving the authority that had taken her hands until blood made them useful again. The Wound-Thread Spool rolled to the Death Review folder and caught a sealed page beneath its strand. The clerk knelt, pale. "There is another classification." Cedran did not look at Malven this time. "Read." The clerk's voice shook. "Death Review classification. Field closure blamed after royal silver exposure." The blamed record reached every cot before anyone explained it. Men who had held still under silver tools now stared at their bandages as if the cloth itself might betray them. Field closure blamed after royal silver exposure. The words did not shout. They did not need to. They had been written to make the dead responsible for the knife that followed. Malvin Orr lifted his chin. "Classification after exposure reflects medical review, Majesty. When a wound fails after formal treatment, we must determine what hidden weakness caused failure." Rosalba Fen stood between the Western Row and the record table, her hands stained with blood and blue threadlight. "And somehow, every hidden weakness learned my name after your office touched it." Cedran Vale did not answer her first. That mattered. For once, he did not look at her pain and try to make it into a moment between them. He looked at the record. "Open the Royal Medical Audit chest," he said. Malvin's composure sharpened. "Majesty, audit chests are sealed until campaign review. This campaign review begins in the tent where the men bled." A stir moved through the field women. Rosalba did not let herself soften. Action was not trust. It was only action. A clerk brought a black case from Malvin's surgical station. Silver clasps locked it. Malvern extended one gloved hand. Cedran stopped him. Not you. For the first time, the war surgeon's face tightened where everyone could see. Cedran looked to Rosalba. Who should open it? The question struck harder than command, not because it restored her, because it forced the room to admit she knew where truth was kept. Rosalba looked to the supply wall. Mireia Voss keeps cleaner records than your royal office. Mireia, a thin field woman with tired eyes and steady hands, stepped forward. Malvern said, "A wash matron cannot handle royal audit seals." Rosalba turned. "She handled the men whose deaths your office made neat. She can handle your box." Cedran have one not. "Open it." Mireia broke the seal, only after Cedran allowed it. Rosalba felt the old bruise again, but smaller this time because another field woman stood in the place power had denied her. Inside were ledgers, trial notes, fever slips, rejected objections, and row maps marked in red and silver. Cedran said, "From this hour, Bloodsnow Wound Authority is shared by named field matrons and royal surgeons. No closure change, silver removal, fever revision, or death classification stands without field notation." Malvern spoke at once. "You are placing battlefield medicine under uncredentialed hands." "No," Rosalba said. "He is admitting credentialed hands, bled men without listening to the women who knew when to wait." Cedran looked at her. There was grief in his eyes. She raised one bloody finger. "Do not ask me to be grateful for the floor being returned after I was pushed beneath it. I was not going to. Good. Learn silence before apology." He accepted it. The Wound-Thread Spool clicked softly near Bren's cot, as if the tent itself had heard the correction. Its strand loosened enough for Rosalba to clean the silver seam without tearing the old closure beneath. Bren groaned. "Matron, I know," she said. "The thread is angry, not cruel." Small breath. He obeyed. Cedran watched the wound edge settle beneath her thread. Malvern saw him watching and moved quickly. "Majesty, she is still relying on an object no royal office has tested." Rosalba laughed under her breath. "Your office tested men without telling them, but my thread is the unapproved thing in the room." Mireia lifted a ledger. "Matron Fen." Rosalba turned. Mireia's face had gone pale. "Field objections were copied. Read them," Cedran said. Mireia read. "Rosalba Fen, do not remove old closure until second fever break. Elsbeth Marr, shoulder wounds holding under wolf, field knot, no silver release advised. Lohengrier, belly wound warm but not rotten. Wait, Sutter Holt. Thread rejection not present. Do not cut." The names moved through the tent like women entering a room that had pretended they were not there. Rosalba closed her eyes for one breath. Not grief. Recognition. Malvern's voice cooled. "Copied objections are not accepted objections," Cedran asked. "How were they classified?" Mireia turned the page. Her mouth tightened. Field, anxiety, emotional delay, non-office obstruction, thread dependency. A low sound rose from the wounded soldiers. Cedran's voice dropped. "Who removed their names from the final charts?" Malvern answered with controlled impatience. "Final charts use office attribution. Field input is summarized." Rosalba turned slowly. "Summarized is how women disappear without the page looking empty." Cedran looked at the ledger, then at the rows of wounded men, then at every field woman standing with blood on her sleeves. "Record the correction," he said. "Rosalba Fen, Mireia Voss, Elsbeth Marr, Lohengrier, and Sutter Holt are named wound authorities in this tent. Their reports are not summaries, they are evidence." The words changed the air, not enough to save him from what he had done, enough to make Malvern's office lose part of the floor beneath its feet. Rosalba looked at Cedran. "You should have said that before the first stitch was cut." "Yes," he said. "No excuse. No plea. The Wound-Thread Spool rolled into the open audit chest and tugged up one final sheet, hidden beneath the trial map. Maria read it with a shaking voice. Royal Medical Office Audit. Field Women's Warnings suppressed before closure trial. The audit page did not make the field women kneel. It made the royal office look suddenly smaller. Rosalba Fen stood with blood drying on her sleeves, while every named warning in the open ledger breathed like a woman finally allowed into the room. Mireia Voss, Elsbeth Marr, Lowen Greer, Sada Holt. Their notes had been copied, suppressed, renamed, and buried before the closure trial began. Malvin Orr looked at those names as if they were untidy stitches on a royal seam. "Warnings are not prohibitions," he said. "Field women may advise. They do not command treatment." Rosalba turned toward him. "They warned before men bled under your silver. They objected before understanding the full procedure." "No," she said. "They understood the wounds before your procedure gave them something to prove." A low sound moved through the Bloodsnow Field Tent. Not anger yet. Something older. Men hearing the difference between care and permission. Cedran Vale stood beside the audit chest, the wolf-bone crown casting sharp shadows over his face. "What do you require to continue stabilization?" Rosalba did not answer quickly, because the question was wrong. Again, he was still asking what he could borrow from her hands to survive the hour. She stepped back from Bren's cot. The wound thread held his seam in a pale blue curve. Not closed, not safe, only waiting. Around them, other wounds pulsed beneath bandages, each one a decision delayed too long by men with silver tools. Rosalba faced the tent. "I will not continue as emergency help." Cedran's expression tightened. Malvin seized it. "Majesty, she is withholding treatment during active crisis." Rosalba lifted one hand. "No, I am refusing to let crisis be the only doorway through which field women are allowed authority." The field women went still. Every wounded soldier watched her now. Cedran's voice came lower. "Name your terms, Matron Fen." The title mattered. Not enough, but it mattered. Rosalba looked at the rose. "First, no field closure is cut without wound release assessment. Second, no soldier is entered into a royal treatment trial without being told. Third, every field woman's note is entered by name beside the surgeon's chart. Fourth, any wound held by the wound thread is under field authority until fever breaks." Malvin's eyes hardened. "You are placing superstition above medicine. I am placing the living above prestige." Cedran looked to the clerk. "Record her terms." Malvin moved forward. "Majesty, if you accept this under pressure, every royal surgeon in the kingdom will answer to campwomen." Rosalba looked at him. "Good. Then perhaps they will learn to ask before cutting." The wound-thread spool clicked at her feet. A strand unwound toward the western row, then stopped before touching the next soldier. Waiting. Rosalba understood. So did Cedran, though the knowledge hurt him when it arrived. "The thread will not move without your consent," he said. Rosalba's mouth tightened. "Do not turn that into romance. It is not choosing me. It is refusing the room that cut before asking." His face changed, but he did not defend himself. "Good." Malvin spoke over the silence. "Majesty, this object reacts to her commands. That is dangerous influence." Rosalba laughed softly. "You cut men open without telling them, but a thread waiting for consent frightens you." Cedran looked at the nearest wounded soldier. "Bren, were you told you were part of a closure trial?" Bren's lips were white. "No, Majesty." "Were you asked before old field knots were removed?" "No." Cedran moved to the next cot. "Harrow?" "No, Majesty. They said royal medicine had already approved it." Another soldier whispered. "They said Matron Fen's stitch was dirty." Rosalba closed her eyes for one breath. Not to break. To keep herself from turning pain into waste. Cedran faced the tent. "No more unconsented trial treatment. No silver removal without field release assessment. Field authorities stand equal on every wound chart. Malvin's calm finally thinned. You are dismantling the Royal Medical Office during war. No, Cedran said. I am removing its right to hide behind war. Rosalba looked at him. That was repair. Part of it. Late. Still bleeding around the edges. You should have protected their yes before my thread had to, she said. Cedran bowed his head once. Yes. No apology. No plea. Only record. Rosalba turned back to Bren. Now we work. The field women moved with her. Mireia, red fever. Elsbeth cut only dead silver. Lowen warmed the thread. Sada recorded before and after. Rosalba guided the wound thread across Bren's seam, not forcing closure, only helping the wound remember the path it had accepted before royal steel interrupted it. The bleeding slowed, then stopped, not healed, held correctly. The tent exhaled. Malvin watched, pale with controlled fury. One successful stabilization does not absolve old methods. Rosalba did not look up. I do not need absolution from the man whose charts needed my warnings erased. The Wound-Thread Spool rolled to the audit chest again. It caught a sealed inner flap no one had opened. The clerk knelt, broke the wax, and went still. Cedran's voice was quiet. Read it. The clerk swallowed. Consent ledger. Bloodsnow wounded, entered into royal closure trial, without notice. The sealed flap opened like a second wound. For a moment, even the storm outside the Bloodsnow Field Tent seemed to hold its breath. The consent ledger lay in the clerk's hands, its pages marked with clean royal lines, and the names of men who had never been told their wounds were being used to prove a theory. Bren stared from his cot. Harrow pushed himself up on one elbow. Around them, soldiers who had trusted the wolf banners more than their own fear watched the Royal Medical Office become smaller than the pain it had renamed. Malvin Orr spoke before the silence could harden. Consent in battlefield conditions is complicated, Majesty. Emergency care cannot wait for ceremony. Rosalba Fen rose slowly from Bren's side. Her hands were red to the wrists. The Wound-Thread Spool rested near her boot, its blue light dim now, not sleeping, only listening. These men knew how to say yes to pain when it might save them, she said. You never gave them the chance to say no to your ambition. Malvin's face tightened. Ambition is your word. Cedran Vale looked at the clerk. Read the entry. The clerk swallowed. Bloodsnow wounded, entered into royal closure trial, under implied battlefield consent. Existing field closures removed to eliminate contamination. Field objections classified as dependency resistance. Patient notice deferred until post-treatment stabilization. A soldier gave a broken laugh from the eastern row. Post-treatment? I was bleeding through their silver before anyone told me they had changed the stitch. Rosalba turned toward him. You were not a subject. You were a soldier. The wound thread clicked once. Not magic enough to heal the room. Truth enough to keep it from closing wrong. Cedran looked at Malvin. Who authorized implied consent? Malvin folded his hands. The Royal Medical Office, under emergency war statute. Signed by whom? The clerk lowered his eyes to the ledger. War Surgeon Malvin Orr. There was no shout, only the small sound of men understanding. Malvin lifted his chin. I signed a battlefield treatment framework. Not harm, not death. Progress costs uncertainty. Rosalba's voice went cold. You made uncertainty bleed in other men's bodies, and called it progress when their charts obeyed you better than their wounds did. Cedran faced the tent, not Malvin. Record this before every soldier present. Wolf King Cedran Vale removed matron Rosalba Fen from primary closure during battle season, accepted royal office authority over field evidence, and allowed her warnings to be reduced to superstition before reading the records himself. Rosalba did not look away. He had not said misunderstanding. He had not blamed Malvin alone. That mattered, not enough to erase the dead, enough to begin where repair should have begun, with power naming its own failure. Cedran continued. The Bloodsnow closure trial is ended. War Surgeon Malvin Orr is removed from command of field treatment pending tribunal. No royal office may cut field closure, revise fever classification, or enter a soldier into treatment study without named consent and field woman review. Malvin's calm cracked at the edge. Majesty, you are giving battlefield medicine to women with no royal credentials. No, Cedran said. I am returning authority to the women whose records your credentials buried. Rosalba felt the field women behind her before she looked. Mireia Voss stood with the audit ledger. Elsbeth Marr with warmed thread. Lowen Greer with fever cloth. Sada Holt with the before and after notes Malvin had once called kitchen caution. Names. Not helpers. Not hands. Authorities. Cedran turned to them. Record the new law. Field closure memory is evidence. Wound release assessment is required before removal. Field women's notes stand equal to surgeon charts. No woman's report may be summarized into anxiety, superstition, or delay risk. Mireia's pen shook, then steadied. Rosalba closed her eyes for one breath. This was not forgiveness. It was the flaw returning beneath women who had been made to work from underneath it. The Wound-Thread Spool rolled to the dead soldier's bandage, the one Rosalba had been unthreading when Cedran called her needlework useless. Blue light moved through the old knots, then spread across the table to the consent ledger, the closure failure sheets, and the revised charts. The thread did not accuse with words. It matched names. Stable, on arrival. Field warning filed. Silver removal applied. Consent deferred. Chart revised. Death blamed on old closure. The pattern stitched itself across the records in pale blue light until even Malvin stopped speaking. Cedran looked at the dead soldier's bandage, his voice roughened. Name him, Rosalba answered, because she had never let the dead become numbers. Tavin Rusk, 38, married to Helena, 2 boys, hated turnip stew, sang low when fever climbed. Cedran bowed his head. Record Tavin Rusk. Field. Stable. Under Rosalba Fen's closure for 3 nights. Died after royal silver removal under unconsented trial protocol. Malvin said nothing. There was nothing left clean enough to say. Wardens took him from the tent without drama. He did not confess. He did not need to. The records had done what his mouth never would. Bren's thread loosened beneath Rosalba's fingers. She bent quickly, checked the seam, then nodded to Elsbeth. Now, warm thread, no silver. Let the fever finish breaking before final closure. Elsbeth moved beside her, not as assistant, as equal. Together, they closed Bren's wound the old way. Not rushed, not pretty, not polished, but alive. The wound. Thread did not finish the work for them. It held memory, while women's hands did what the royal office had mocked. When Bren's bleeding stopped, the tent exhaled. Cedran remained across the aisle. He did not come closer. Rosalba noticed. So did her heart, traitorous and tired. You may keep the law, she said without looking at him, and still never earn my trust. I know, he said. No, learn the difference. Knowing is a thought. Keeping is an action repeated when I am not watching. He lowered his head. Then I will keep it when you are not watching. She finally looked at him. The Wolf King, who had once admired her hands and failed to protect them, stood before the army with his crown heavy and his pride cut open. He did not ask for her heart. That was the first mercy he had offered that did not require her to bleed for it. Rosalba lifted the Wound-Thread Spool and placed it in her own kit. The Bloodsnow Field Tent works under field. Woman authority until every wound is reviewed, she said. After that, I decide whether I serve your crown again. Cedran's voice was quiet. And if you do not, then you will still keep the law. Yes, Matron Fen, Outside, the red snow kept falling. Inside, soldiers slept under stitches that had been allowed to hold until their bodies were ready. Rosalba turned back to the wounded, her name written beside every chart at last, her thread in her hand, and her future no longer waiting for a king to decide its worth.